Here's Alex from Black Sheep IT Consulting, and today we're trying something different. You see, I have opened a webpage, Visual Paradigm Online, which I literally just Googled and found, and it's a impressive tool which is online, and there's a free tier which I'm using to draw, well, diagrams, and in our case I'm drawing an entity relationship diagram. And why I'm doing this? Because I want to talk about something that many people who work with Siebel haven't really grasped as the main concept of Siebel data modeling. It's actually about the real world as it is, with people and companies and processes, etc. And the ability of Siebel to map the real world into entities. Of course, we know these entities much better by the name of business components. And I would like to start the diagram with an entity that you probably know. It's you or me. It's a person. And that person is a real world entity. Okay, so the real world, we live in the real world, and we have things to do in our job, and those things are hopefully, well, there's a little bit of hope, part of a process. So here's another entity, and I call that entity a process. So yeah, in your job you have several things to do, and you probably use a computer, an application to do this process. So process in the real world is not a single thing you do. It's not a single thing. It's not that simple. So a process has multiple steps, right? And for each step, as you do this in a job, you hopefully, again, it's the real world. It might not be the case, but you get instructions or details about each step. For example, you have to click this button now, or you have to fill in this field, or this field is required. So you see where this is going, right? So we have details for each step. And yeah, let's connect that up a little bit. So we have here a process has steps, which is one to many, and yeah, this is a great tool, really. So we have one-to-many relationships here from the process. Now, there could be a 2-hour or 2-day lecture about business processes and business process documentation and all the tools you have. But basically, when you want to implement a process in an application, you have to translate the real world into the technical world of that application. And the application, of course, in our case, is Siebel. So you're not the only person doing that process, are you? So if you work in a larger organization, you have just peers, people belonging to a group which have the same things to do usually, right? So that is also an important real world concept. Now, as a person, you're a member of a group most of the time, and a group, of course, is more than one person. And a group would have more than one processes to do typically, and the same process can be done by other groups. So we have those many-to-many relationships here. Now, I've been colorizing these entities here because they belong to the real world. So let's call the real world also the business perspective, right? So that is a perspective that we can have on the world. And of course, in the sense of an organization doing some business, having people employed that have to do some processes, it's a business perspective. So now, when you are choosing your technical application to implement those processes and have people using the system to fulfill the process, you have to choose a system that allows you to translate these 5 entities into a technical perspective. So let's think of the Siebel application. So here we have a Siebel application, Siebel call center, and has tons of screens, and each screen has tons of views. So as you are about to, well, live a process in Siebel CRM, you either have to know exactly where you're going. So for example, you want to create a new account, go to My Accounts and click this button and fill in these fields. So you have that knowledge either through training or, well, you have just found out, or the system guides you. Can Siebel guide us through a process? Oh yes, it can. Well, there's iHelp ready to use in the Siebel sample database. Create a new account. So the system now guides us through the process. It has each step of the process mapped out here. So enter new record. So first you navigate to the My Accounts view. It tells us that's the details. That's a step, that's details. Click new, another detail. It even highlights the button. Of course, I want to show off iHelp again and just keep reminding you that it is there, and it's so super easy to implement. No Siebel tools required, no repository. And when you have finished entering the base account information, you might want to add a contact, so you go to another view. So some steps in the process require you to be in a different view because you need to see the data differently. Okay, so stopping here, let's go back to a diagram and see where this fits in. So let's have an entity for the Siebel view. And I put it down below the step. So I should be able to draw a line here. Oops. So I will just use this type. It's a one-to-one relationship, of course. That's not entirely correct, but it gives us an idea that to fulfill each step in a process, we need to open a view in Siebel. We need to be in a view. And now we're in the technical layer. So we know that much about Siebel CRM. If you've been around for a while, that a view has applets. And those applets can actually form a many-to-many relationship with the view. So many views reuse applets. And that's a cool thing about Siebel in itself. So the details of that step, the button you click, etc., that's part of the applet definition. So you see immediately when you define your details thoroughly and you have your requirements mapped out, then you know exactly which applet do I have to put this new button in, or this field, or this list column. And of course we can go a little bit further, space allowing here on the screen, that an applet sure contains those individual buttons, etc. So let's just call them, for sake of a better word, let's call them controls. Or that'll be, of course, the singular is more correct. Sorry for that. So yeah, we have mapped out the real world, a step in a process, to a view where you have to be, and applet and its controls as the details, we're mapping to the details. Now you have seen me using iHelp, and iHelp fits in the picture here as the implementation of the process. But iHelp is not required to do the process. So I just maybe use a gray box here, but definitely you can implement iHelp, or, well, you could implement something else like Task UI, task-based UI, both of which are let me move that down here, are actual implementations of things, entities that define a set of views that you navigate. Yeah, that's cool. So yeah, we have, and of course the same view can be used in different tasks, etc. So that is super cool already, but we can design this system and can be the best Siebel CRM ever defined with really refined applets and views, but we have nobody to use it. Okay, so we have talked about the real world, the business perspective, and now let's talk about the technical perspective, where we need to make sure that technically people are able to log in. And this is something where we can also map the real world. So can we map a person to an entity in Siebel? And as you listen and nod, you might already have done this yourself. You might have just created a user or an employee. So let's just keep this simple, because in Siebel we have an entity for the user, but we also have an entity for the employee. And I would like to, well, in the second half of this presentation, I would like to just talk about the difference between a user and an employee. But basically both, if you're a simple user in Siebel or you're an employee user in Siebel, you need to be able to access the view. Now, the view allows you to access all the features, that is the applets and the controls that you need to do in order to, well, do your job, do the process. So in Siebel, of course, we have an entity, and suddenly we see that the entire business perspective of persons in groups, etc., maps out, because that group of people that has access, that has to execute one or more processes and needs access to that Siebel views, well, we have a name for that. We have an entity in Siebel, responsibility. So we just give a user a set of responsibilities, and those can be shared, of course. And now we can associate the responsibility with the view. Let me just maybe connect that like so. So a responsibility is literally a list of views, and the same view can be used in other responsibilities. Okay, let me just put that in here. So when we map those groups of users to responsibilities and map each person to, well, an employee or user, then we can give them responsibilities so they can find the views in Siebel or navigate there and do the job. And yes, you're right that also the ability to use iHelp and Task UI is actually driven by the responsibility. Okay, so there we have it. We have mapped out the real world, well, a part of the real world that is essential to implementing an application like Siebel CRM, to the technical perspective. All these red boxes are technical entities in Siebel that exist out of the box. And now we can take it a little bit further. Of course, the entire data model of Siebel would never fit on a single screen, but we can go as far and explaining what's the difference between an employee and a user, because you might ask yourself, okay, why is there a different entity? So the most common use case for people using Siebel CRM or corporate applications is they are employees of a corporation, of an organization. Oops, there I said it, organization. So a person working for a company, and now of course I'm a little bit in trouble space-wise, but we get there. So yeah, shifted things a little bit and resized the canvas. Bit new to this tool, but I hope you forgive me for that. So a person working for an organization can be depicted like that, with the organization or the company. Let's say you work for a company, right? That's a term we can all agree on, is a real world term. And so a company, of course, it would employ multiple people, but it's not that easy because those people have roles. Yeah, that's one word you can use. So they have a job role to fulfill. You hire them for a certain position. So the word I will use in the real world is, I will on purpose use a different word. So role it is. So you will hire a person for a role in your company. And you probably hire more than one person for the same role, unless it's a CEO or so. And then you have multiple roles in your company. Sorry, that's actually one too many. So one company has multiple roles to fill, and that's the relationship in the real world. And guess what Siebel does? We map that real world entities, those real world entities, to technical entities. So for the employee to sign up to be a member of a certain company, we translate that to a position in Siebel. And that position is part of an organization. Okay, so you see, there's always a mapping, there's always an entity that maps to the real world. That's the true power of Siebel. And we also try, most times it works out that the relationships are the same. So one employee can have many positions, the same position can be shared by multiple employees, but a position there can be many positions in the organization, but a position only belongs to one organization. And that, ladies and gentlemen, that is a employee. An employee has a position in Siebel, has been assigned a position and assigned to an organization. A user, however, to come back to the difference between user and employees, a user does not have a position assigned. Now, what sense does this make? When you work in a large organization with Siebel CRM, you think of people using Siebel being employees of an organization. That's true most of the time, but think of maybe a company running a loyalty program, like an airline with the cards that lets you collect miles, and your passengers, your customers want, of course, to see how many miles do I have. So translate that to Siebel. A process is check my miles or redeem the miles. So you need to be in a few in Siebel and use an applet. Yes, it's that simple. But those are 50 million customers, and they are not hired, they are not members of your company, they're not in your organizations, but still they need to be able to log in to Siebel and see some views. And that's a user. That's the customers typically using a portal and having a responsibility, of course, because otherwise you can't see any views. and that responsibility enables them to use the views that are necessary to check how many miles do I have on my loyalty card. So good example, customers are, when they have access to Siebel, they are users, naturally. Like, they're still persons belonging to a group, but they don't need a position. They're not hired. They don't work for us. So one thing I recently discussed with a customer is that, of course, you can use the employee credentials or the user credentials, that is the login name of the person, or the ID rather, the row ID of that person, or you can use the row IDs of positions, or you can use the row ID of organizations and associate them with the records in your database to create something we call in Siebel visibility. Now, the visibility of data is very important when it comes to different people, in different positions, or even in different organizations. Hello, multi-tenancy, use the same system. So let's bring in, for lack of a better icon, let's bring in this as a record in the database. So it could be one of billions of records. And you have the ability in Siebel through, well, depending on the entity, for accounts it's different than for activities, but you get the general idea. I can associate that record to either the employee directly, like so, or I can associate that record to one or more positions, or I can associate the record to one or more organizations. Now it matches up. So that means there's a pointer, foreign key, pointing in the database to either of those or all three of those different types. That's row IDs in the Siebel database, if you know what I'm talking about. So the ability to associate the record could drive different types of visibility. And let's go back to Siebel for a moment, as I'm looking at, for example, the account list category of views. We have my accounts, or we have all accounts, or my team's accounts, or all accounts across organizations. A very familiar site if you've been around with Siebel for a while. And it's interesting to see, and also that of course would be a whole different presentation, and you can take a training on the Siebel Hub to learn more about this. That is using different types of association with the position in case of my accounts, because your position is on the team, right? There's a team field, or the organization field in case of all accounts has your current organization associated with the record. So those views, and those are different views, you can assign through responsibilities to allow users different levels of data visibility. And we aptly call in Siebel, we call this the visibility dropdown. But what you're really doing is you're just navigating between, you're selecting a view. So to keep things easy to read, I'll just put in an explanation text here. That would be the my visibility is, well, when you associate a record with a position or an employee, that translates to my, depending on the record. And you have an all visibility if you're doing this through the organizations. So what is labeled all for the employee, or in this case must be an employee, what is labeled all is really not all the records in the database, it's all the records within that employee's organization. So yeah, there you have it. Once you have established that mapping from the real world to a technical perspective, and keep adhering to mapping real world stuff to the technical, then you can not only use a system to view some data, you can use the system to filter data effectively, or even implement a multi-tenancy multiple organization, which is of course a standard in Siebel CRM. Quite a lot of people don't realize that Siebel is a multi-tenancy application. We never say tenant in Siebel, we don't use that word, we say organization. So different organizations can use the same CRM system. Sounds familiar? Yes, of course it does. So let's continue that game. Thanks for sticking around with me here. And the game we continue on the right hand side, because now we are asked to implement new stuff. For example, in the details, the users ask us, okay, can you create a new field? We want in this form applet. They would say form, not form applet probably, because they're business people. In that form, we want a new field. They say field. We say control in the technical world. But what they really mean is we need to make sure that new information can be displayed as part of the process. So what we do is expand the business layer of Siebel. And now we can continue mapping out the real world. So the business component, that's of course a very powerful way to map any real world entity. So responsibility is a business component, employee is one. The view itself, the applet itself, as confusing as that sounds, even business component is represented by a business component. Siebel is very meta in that sense. And we can create new business components to map out new entities. So if you have a real world entity, let's say for horses, because you want to have a horse relationship management system, and believe me, there is one, hello, then you map it out to an existing business component, or you create a new business component. And business components, like entities in the real world, they have attributes, and we call them fields. Field. So a business component as such has many fields. You see how that nicely maps out to the applet. So let's try and do, for one business component, you can have many applets. And that field control relationship is actually just a mapping. And yeah, let's not miss the business object. One of the more confusing things for Siebel learners is the business object, which allows us to define the relationships between the entities. And in this case, the same entity can be reused in many business objects. Now, that again is a whole different talk we can give, and maybe I do so. Whoopsie daisy, just give me one moment. Starting to grow into this tool. So a business object, for one business object you can have many views, and within those views you can have any applet displayed that is part of the business object in terms of the business component underlying that applet. And of course the applet can display any field of that business component. Now that sounds trivial if you worked with Siebel for a while, but if you come here to this channel and Siebel is new to you, you might find that information quite useful. So we have been talking about a new field, and very often you cannot just add a field, you also need a physical storage for that field. And that of course is our a column in a table. So you might need to create a new column in a table. And while that is a trivial task, if you have access to the database, Siebel has a way to do it through the repository definitions that we have. But still, the fact that in Siebel CRM you can create any number of custom tables and, well, not an infinite, but a very large number of custom columns in either a standard or a custom table, that really sets Siebel apart from any other CRM system that is very restrictive in that sense. Now, I don't know all CRM systems, and I'm quite sure the on-prem systems allow a certain way of modifying the schema, but compared to cloud CRMs, even if Siebel runs in the cloud, you can still access the database, change the schema in, of course, a controlled manner. We teach how to do that on the Siebel Hub learning experience, so check out the link in the description. So a business component field, well, that's Siebel trivia now, right? Siebel business component field is mapped to a column in a table, and the business component can map to actually many tables, or that's a many-to-many relationship really, because the same table can be mapped in many business components, and of course the table has many columns. So now we have gone deep down into the guts of Siebel. So that new column you're creating for the purpose of a new field to show in the applet. So you have to modify a few things because somebody told you we have to change the details of this step in the process. So now let's visit the real world again. And if you have a project, an implementation project for your CRM, for another release of your Siebel CRM, it would actually make sense to do this project for one or more processes. So over time you have multiple projects, maybe for the same process. And well, project management can be very different, but in the project you define requirements. You have sprints, you have stories, you have epics, etc. And now, if your project management tool allows, you also have the person assigned to do that, and you have the cost associated, or the story points, t-shirt sizes, you name it. But essentially you have associated cost, time and effort with that project. And wouldn't it be great to see, okay, adding that column, adding for the purpose of a new field and modifying the table, the BC, adding the control to the applet, because of this requirement that we mapped out, the change in details on this process, which we did in that project, cost us so much money. So there you see how the technical perspective of Siebel, or of any software application, reflects back into the real world, because when you start changing that application, you incur real world effort or cost in a project. Okay, so I would stop there because I have to just stop somewhere, right? And each of these entities in the technical world of Siebel, we could of course talk a lot about, and here it's time to talk about where can you learn more about this. And if you're new to Siebel, or if you're an experienced Siebel practitioner, do check out the Siebel Hub learning experience. Go to siebelhub.com, find the Siebel CRM training tab. We have new features courses for experienced people. We have developer essentials, which, well, essentially talks a lot about things we just discussed in these presentations. And do check out the information in the description of this video. Contact us for a free consultation of your training needs, either if you're an absolute beginner of Siebel CRM or you have 20 years of experience. There's always something new to learn. So thank you very much for watching. Take care and bye-bye.